You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is the Sharon Carr case, Britain's youngest female killer, who almost got away with it. They were so baffled by this case that they had no idea that it could have been such a young killer, and definitely not a girl. But boy, were they in for a surprise. By the way, I post so much content for Suspect Summer in July, so make sure you are subscribed for that. Now let's get back to the story. It was 1992 in England, in the nightclub district of Farnborough, and 18-year-old Katie Radcliffe was out at the bar. She was a hairdresser, and she was just out kind of having some fun when she ran into her ex-boyfriend. Now, her ex-boyfriend then informed her that he was with another girl, and this really upset the normally very joyful Katie. She decided to go ahead and walk home, and she was kind of a little intoxicated, but she was headed home anyway, and unfortunately she would never make it there, and the next morning she would be found dead with multiple stab wounds, approximately 30, on a side street. Investigators automatically believed that this was done by a male due to the fact that she was almost completely naked and her private areas were mutilated. Now, this would lead to them looking for a male and never coming up with a suspect or any idea of who could have done this and why. And this would last unsolved until 2 years later. You see, a very similar case had occurred on the 2-year anniversary of Katie's murder, and it was at the Collingwood College in Surrey, and it was an attack of a girl on her classmate. 14-year-old Sharon Carr had stabbed her classmate Anne Marie Clifford in the back, but thankfully she survived. Witnesses immediately called the police, and Sharon was taken into an assessment center for a psych evaluation, and she quickly showed that she was very unstable. She began to try to strangle the actual people in the room, the detention staff, and because of this she was arrested and put into jail or a detention center for 2 years. Police were so concerned about her volatile nature that they even monitored her conversations with her family and friends when they would come and visit her. They also had a guard get kind of close to her and make her feel comfortable, and this was very easy for her to get very comfortable to this guard, and he would learn so much about her that would ultimately expose some very horrific things. She began to tell him of details of an unsolved murder that had happened a few years prior, that nobody else knew what had happened. And yet she did. You see, Sharon decided to tell him that that night, a 12-year-old Sharon would go to the nightclub district with 2 male friends who were much older and could drive, and they were just kind of cruising around because, of course, Sharon couldn't go in any of these places because she was 12. And they were looking for some fun when they saw Katie walking down the road at about 2:30 a.m. They invited her over and asked her if she needed a ride, and her being kind of intoxicated, she decided it was probably best that she got a ride home anyway, and so she got in the car with them, and they weren't taking her home. They actually took her to an isolated park where she got out and was very upset, and that is when Sharon followed her with a 6-inch blade and began to stab her close to 30 times. They were in the chest, the heart, and the abdomen, and she bled to death. Sharon then mutilated her genitalia and breasts, and she turned to the males to ask them for help to move her body, except for they had already left her behind. So Sharon had to pull Katie into a side street and flee. After the guard reported this information to police, Sharon's diaries were actually taken in to be looked at, and it was found that on the night of the murder, Sharon had wrote in them saying that killing was a mass turn-on for her and that made her feel high, and that if she could do it again, she would draw out the process because she liked to hear Katie's screams. Throughout the 2 years before the second accident, Sharon would continue on with the fantasies about Katie and kind of just replaying it over and over, rewriting it in her diary, saying and drawing like pictures of it as well, saying things like, "I am a killer. Killing is my business, and I was born to be a murderer. Killing for me is a mass turn on, and it just makes me so high. I never want to come down. Every night I see the devil in my dreams, sometimes even in my mirror. But I realize it was just me." By the time Sharon confessed to Katie's murder, it had been 4 years, and yet she was still replaying it and fantasizing about it as if she had just done it, as if it was constantly on replay in her head. And she wrote, 4 years after the murder, "I bring the knife into her chest. Her eyes are closing. She is pleading with me, so I bring the knife to her again and again. I don't want to hurt her, but I need to do violence to her. I need to overcome her beauty, her serenity, her security. There I see her face when she died. I know she feels her life being slowly drawn from her, and I hear her gasp. I guess she was trying to breathe. The air stops in the back of her throat. I know all her life her breathing has worked, but it does not now, and I am joyful." So in 1996, she was being arrested again, but this time for murder. And detectives questioned her for 27 hours, and she gave 3 different statements about what exactly happened, but 2 of which said that the attack actually happened in the car, and that after she was done stabbing her, the 2 men with her sexually assaulted Katie, and then they dumped her body. Sharon actually willingly gave the names of the 2 men with her, and they were brought in for questioning, but they both gave each other an alibi and somehow were ruled out of the entire case. And Sharon was actually still writing in her diaries during her interrogation, even though she knew they were going to look at her diaries, but she wrote, "I am not like one of those pretty girls who breaks down due to a guilty conscience. Through 6.5 years of causing grief, I still have not found one." And on the 4th anniversary of Katie's murder, she wrote, "Respect to Katie Ratcliffe, 4 years today." And the detective who interviewed Sharon the most said that it was like she was on a different world, like she was not in our world. There was a complete coldness to her and an absence of emotion and reason. But in trial, Sharon Carr pled not guilty and then was sentenced to 14 years in prison. That's it. Although in prison, she was still continuing to attack other prisoners and staff, and was eventually moved to different prisons to try to get her under control. And finally, in 1998, she was transferred to the Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, where she was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. And schizoaffective disorder is a combination of schizophrenia and a mood disorder. This can cause mood swings that can be really severe and turn on and off, and also delusions and hallucinations where you can have fixed beliefs or see something or hear something that isn't really there. Eventually, this Broadmoor hospital was turned into a male only, so she was sent to a different hospital, but there was speculation that she could have been released in 2009. However, many people say that she should never ever be released. Experts say that any mental health tribunal or a parole board should know that she will never be fit for release. And crime expert Stephen Wright said she is in that category of really dangerous psychopathic murderer where there is no way the public can be safe at whatever age she comes out of custody. She is pure evil. She should never be released. And thankfully, Sharon is still inside the hospital getting medication. She is said to be maturing and that she's a pretty good patient and well engaged in psychotherapy right now. The only problem is I think it is mostly to do with her medication, and of course if they release her, she is most likely going to slip out at one point or not even want to take her medicine because she's not being forced to, and that's when it can get scary. I hope that they know that it's mostly probably her medication and not just a change in character, but some people can definitely be tricked by that, even in the medical field, and that scares me. But while she is sectioned under the Mental Health Act of 1983, she can only be paroled or only be eligible for parole if she is sent back to regular prison. And for that, she'd have to be discharged from the actual psychiatric hospital, meaning they really truly believe that she is better, which doesn't seem like they do, so let's hope so. But the real question everyone had was, how could someone be so brutal, so aggressive, so out of their mind at 12 years old. Well, Sharon Carr was born in Belize in 1981, and her mother and her stepfather moved to Chamberley, Surrey in England later on. Sharon was one of 4 children, and her mother often had a lot of different boyfriends around, and one of which she got into a huge violent fight with, and they were actually both hospitalized for it at that point when Sharon was 7, which is thought to have, could have had some effect on Sharon and her view of violence. A year before the murder, Sharon was known at school to be a popular and kind and caring young girl, but that would slowly start to change, or maybe that was just her persona finally fading. Her mother started to find her behavior uncontrollable and was actually seemed to be kind of scared of her. Sharon's first victim was thought to be a neighborhood dog who she decapitated with a spade. She was also said to fry live hamsters. All of the makings of a serial killer. Everything that you'd think of in the childhood of someone who is capable of much more horrific things. Now, Sharon's mother actually couldn't handle it any longer and sent her into foster care for about a month before she was allowed to return home. And I can tell you from personal experience, my family did foster care for many, many years, and although we'd like to say that we were a very loving, helpful family, the foster system in general is very rough, and often the kids get more messed up in the foster system than if they never went in there at all, and so I'm sure that that didn't help either. And even in school, they could see Sharon changing into a disruptive, attention-seeking young girl, and she would turn into a murderer who is nicknamed the Devil's Daughter. Now, I have a question for you, because many believe that child killers should have some leniency and get a second chance as adults. I don't believe that if you were like that as a kid, you are gonna be a stable adult, especially if you've then been in jail for so long afterwards. Especially because jail, you don't go in there to get better, you go in there to be held, to make sure you're not making more ruckus in society. So I'm not sure that we can just say, oh, just because they were a kid they made these mistakes, especially someone like Sharon. I mean, she was a brutal killer who, from her diary, had the mind of some of the worst serial killers in the world. So no, I don't think she should get a second chance just because she was young when that happened. I think some people are born evil, and it doesn't matter how old they are, they're still going to continue to do that. But I'd love to know if you think they should get a second chance. Do you think her possible childhood trauma could have led to this, or do you think she would have turned out a monster regardless? Her mental illness, her schizoaffective disorder, that doesn't equal a killer. You can't just say because someone has mental illness, they were going to be a killer. No matter what you think about certain mental illnesses and how scary they are, or that they appear, it doesn't make a killer. It doesn't make a bad person. But I think that possibly combined with, however she was born, like her brain when she was born, or possibly her childhood trauma, there had to be something else that went into it that coupled the two and made her who she was. But that's just, I've always been so intrigued with how killers get to be how they are. And hers is one case I wish they would have looked into more about how exactly she got to be this way at only 12 years old. But I love doing these killer kid cases because I want you guys to know that evil comes in many different forms, and it doesn't matter if it's a child. That doesn't make them innocent. Looks can be deceiving, and especially with somebody who is a sociopath or a psychopath, they are the most deceptive people in the world, and we just got to be careful no matter the age. Look out. Don't ever think that you're safe. And watch the movie Orphan if you really want to get yourself scared, because that one is terrifying. So if you want me to do any more killer kids, then make sure to leave them down below. I would love to do those, even though they freak me out the most to research, but I think that they're beneficial to let people know that it's not always the creepy looking men that, are going to come and attack you. It can be anybody, so please be careful out there. Sorry if I'm scaring you. Don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.